Hi, today we're on our last of our Repair Cafe series, and we're going to talk a little bit about making garments bigger. We've talked about taking them in, and yeah, that's fine, but let's face it, most of us do tend to expand with time. So we're going to look at a couple of simple ways that you can perhaps get more use out of your clothes if you happen to have just had a few more bottles of wine or cakes than you should. It's not that easy to let garments out, but you can do a little sort of cheating sometimes and help them on the way. So if you have a garment, say this t-shirt for example, and it's a little tight, it shows all the lumps and bumps and you feel, I wish it was a little wider. One thing that you can do is you can stretch it simply. I mean, if it's a t-shirt, obviously it's already a stretchy fabric. The stretch will go back in when you wear it, but if you want it more permanently stretched, wash the garment as you normally would, and while it's still damp, stretch it out as much as you want it to, or you can. And if you then pin it out or hold it down in some way, dry it flat, you will find that that will give you a little bit of ease. You can only do that obviously with garments that are knitted, like t-shirts, or perhaps even like a cardigan like this. If it's wool particularly, it's quite easy to get that little bit of extra ease. Well, that's all very well, but you can't do that with a garment that's made of a woven fabric which doesn't have any stretch. But there is a way that you can make your garments a little bit bigger. Again, you're not going to do this with something that's really precious or wonderful. But if it's just an everyday garment that you quite like and you just want to have a little bit more of life out of it, then what you can do is you can add a gusset. So it requires a little bit of cutting and a little bit of sewing. I'm going to show you how. So here's the t-shirt that I'm going to do something with. I've turned it inside out, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the complete side seam, and I'm going to insert a piece of fabric. Now, I don't have any green fabric, and unless you're very lucky and have a matching piece of fabric, you're going to have to use a contrast. And I'm just going to use this. It's a similar kind of weight to fabric, and I'm going to add that to the side. So the first thing to do is to cut it. Don't be frightened, you're just going to cut the whole thing. So I'm just going to cut right up that seam, all the way along. So I have now opened the complete side seam, and I've actually gone into the sleeve as well because it's got one of these little cap sleeves and it's just as well to put extra in there too. So I've cut right down the seam, and I've also just opened up the hem a little bit on either side so that when we actually put the gusset in, we can then fold the whole hem over. So once we've done that, we're going to take one side, I'm going to lay it right side up, I'm going to take our piece of fabric that we're going to insert and we're going to put that right side down. It's always right sides together when you're sewing. So I'm going to start at the bottom there, and I'm just going to match the whole thing up, and I'm going to pin it. You don't need a million pins. I'm just going to pin it all the way up. So there I have the first side pinned in place, and I've pinned it all the way to the bottom, including over the hem, and all the way to the top. And then I'm going to sew that in place. Now you can sew this by hand if you want. I'm going to demonstrate it on the sewing machine because it'll be quicker. So I'm now going to sew this gusset to the first side of the t-shirt. I'm going to use the sewing machine, and I have set it to sew with a narrow zigzag. The reason for that is because this is a stretchy fabric, and it's a very stretchy fabric, as you can see. If you use a straight stitch, there's a danger of it breaking. If you were doing this on a woven type fabric with no stretch, then you would just use a straight stitch. So I'm using a zigzag stitch, 2.5 millimeters in length and a 1.5 width, which gives you a very good stitch for sewing jersey fabrics. So here we go, and I'm just going to take a very narrow hem. The beauty of sewing with jersey is that it doesn't fray, so you don't need to worry about finishing the edges. If you don't want to, you can if you like. So I'm just going to set that under there, and off we go. can see, I hope, the size of the stitch. You have to do a lot of rearranging on the way down here. Not forgetting to remove your pins as you go, of course. I'm using white thread here so that you can see it, but obviously you would use a matching colour so that it doesn't show. And I'm taking it all the way to the end. And I've opened the hem, and I'm making sure that this goes all the way and right down to the bottom of the unfolded hem. Okay, so that is the first side. So now you can obviously see the stitches there slightly because I've used a white thread. And I'm just going to do exactly the same with the other side. Now I have sewn the other side just as we did the first one. You can see the little zigzag stitching that I used, and you can see how that is still nice and stretchy, so you won't have any splitting going on. It looks a bit messy. I'm going to turn it to the right side and show you. So now we have the gusset which is inserted, which will give us another inch or so of extra ease in this garment. You can make this as big as you want. You could make it shaped if you wanted a garment, if you wanted to make it wider at the bottom than at the top. You can cut a V-shaped piece of fabric. So now all I'm going to do is I'm going to trim the ends, and then I can turn the hem back in and sew along there. That one doesn't need trimming. Turn the hem back in and sew that. Now I'm not going to sew this on my machine because I've got a white thread in, but if you were using a matching thread you could do that, or you could just sew it by hand, just slip stitch it down. Now because these don't look very beautiful, these seams, but because these fabrics don't fray, you don't need to do anything else with finishing them. You can trim them up a little bit if you want. And there you have it. So adding gussets to your garments, an easy way to make them bigger. And if you make them really funky, well, it could be a fashion statement too.